If you consider today's software development arena, the two concepts every developer should be familiar with are creating RESTful web services and developing enterprise-grade application using microservices architecture. Hi, welcome to this knowledge capsule session. My name is Reni. In this session, we are going to discuss is creating a RESTful web service using MongoDB as the backend data store. There are certain prerequisites for you to follow along. I expect you to have a thorough understanding of Java programming language, a complete Spring. So when I say complete Spring, it includes Spring Core, Spring Boot, Spring REST, and finally MongoDB. The database part, MongoDB also you need to have some kind of understanding. So what is a MongoDB? What's a collection? What are documents in MongoDB? That kind of basic understanding of MongoDB is also expected here. The system architecture, the application architecture, what we are trying to follow here is something like this. We will have a REST client which communicates with the REST controller, which in turns communicate with the service layer, which communicate with the repository, which in turns communicate with the MongoDB database. We are not going to create any custom client here. We will be using the Postman as the REST client, which is basically used for testing different functionalities of the application which we are developing. It's a fully demo-oriented session. Clear? So without much delay, we are moving into the application development. So I'll first go to start.spring.io. I'll use the Java programming language, latest version of Spring Boot, that is 2.5.4. Group ID, I'll give it as com.demo. Artifact ID, I'll give it as employee service. Description is fine. Package name also I'm giving it as com.demo. Coming to dependencies, definitely we need web. Then we need to have dev tools for supporting the development of the application. Similarly, Lombok also I'll use. And finally, the MongoDB part. Data MongoDB will use, Spring Data MongoDB. These are the dependencies which are required. I'll generate. So that is downloaded. So we'll go to the download sessions here. You can see that employee service has been downloaded. We'll cut this one. Go to D drive. Paste it there. And we will extract this one. So the zip file I will remove. Now the ID which I am using for developing this application is IntelliJ IDEA Ultimate. You can follow along with any ID of your choice. So here you can see the D drive, the demo folder. You have employee service. I'll open that. Let it download all the dependencies. Perfect. That is done. Now if you open the src folder here, you can see your main. I'll go to the Java resources here where application.properties resides. So we will have some configuration which is specific to MongoDB. That is spring.data.mongodb.database, one property which specifies the name of the database. Spring.data.mongodb.host we need to specify, which is nothing but the local host. So this is the machine. The local host is the current my machine on which the MongoDB is working. If it is at some remote location, you need to specify the domain name or the IP address of of that machine. Then spring.data.mongodb.port. That is a port number in which MongoDB is running. So typically the port number is 27017. This is the port number in which MongoDB is running. So these are the properties which you need to specify when we are configuring MongoDB in the application.properties. That I'll close. Now I have a MongoDB install. I have an instance of MongoDB installed on my system. So it is not connecting basically because I think MongoDB is not working. MongoDB is not running now. So we'll go and check. I'll go to services.msc. Search for MongoDB. You can see that MongoDB server, it is not running. It is running as a service in my system. So you have to start this one. It is running as a Windows service. Now, if you go and issue the command Mongo, you can see that it's connected. Now, you can check what all databases are there, show DBs. So, this many databases are there. You can see employee DB. This is the database which we are using. As you have seen here in the applications.property, we have specified the name of the database as empdb. Okay. So we will see what all contents are there in empdb. So I'll first move into that particular database. So collections. So collection is nothing but tables. So in MongoDB terminology, we will not be using the term tables. Here we will be using the term collection. So collection is equivalent to a table in a relational database model. Similarly, each and every entity or records inside the table is referred to as a document. So if you want to see the documents inside the employee table, so here we will go and use the employee table here. So we will check how it works. So we will see db.employee.find. This is the command for pulling out all records. So these are you can see that two records are there or two documents are there. You may not be using the terminology record or entity here. You have to use the terminology document. So there are two documents inside the collection here, employee collection here, that is with ID 1 and ID 2. Another important point which you need to be familiar here is you can see there is a property called underscore ID here. Here you can see that there is a property called underscore ID that is actually considered as the primary key for a collection in MongoDB. Always it will be underscore ID. Clear? So suppose you are not providing any value for underscore ID, then an underscore ID value will be automatically generated by MongoDB. Here I am providing the value 1 and 2 because by default it will be an alphanumeric data. I am providing a numeric data here. So always the primary key in MongoDB is identified with a property called underscore ID. That is the point which you need to keep in mind. So two documents are there in the collection as of now. So we will create a domain model which is adhering to this specific structure. That is ID, name, gender, age and salary. Forget about this underscore class that is also automatically generated by MongoDB. We will see sometime later how to avoid including this underscore class property in your document. So first we will go and create a domain model which is exactly similar to the document inside the employee collection. So I'll go to the Java part here. This is the package. So there I'll create a new Java class here. And this domain model should be inside a package called model. So I'm putting model dot. The name of the model is employee. Clear? This is similar to an entity in your relational database model. Okay, so it is in JPA you know that you will be using entities. But here there is no concept of any entities. We will not be referring to this particular model as an entity. Instead, as I told you, each and every data element inside the collection is referred to as a document. So this is actually a document now, not an entity. So we will define the properties which are available here: ID, name, gender, age, and salary. So we will be having the values there. We will say private. ID is my primary key, private. Second one is string name. Third one is gender. Fourth one is age. And fifth one is salary. Okay, I will use some Lombok specific annotation here for auto generating the code. I need all argument constructor. I need no argument constructor. I need getters, setters plus toString method. Then I'll use MongoDB specific. This is a document. This annotation is similar to @entity in JPA. And one mandatory property you need to give a collection name. The collection name is employee. That is the name of the collection here, or name of the table here. I told you that we will not be using the terminology table here. We will be using it as collection. So this is the collection name. Employee is the collection name. You can see here. This is the collection which we are using. A collection is equivalent to a table in a relational database management system. Okay, so these are the things. Primary key can be specified by using @ID. So this is the primary key. But there is a difference here. I am specifying the primary key here as ID, whereas in the collection it is _ID. Okay, so there is a difference between the property which we are defining inside the domain model and the property there inside the collection. So you need to mention that by using another annotation called @field, and you can use a property called name here, an attribute called name here. It is _ID. So this @field is similar to @column annotation in JPA. So that is the point. So these are the only things. For other thing also, I can use the @field annotation, but that is not required because the name here exactly matches the properties here. If there is a deviation, if there is a difference between the properties mentioned inside the domain model and the properties inside the document in the collection, then you have to mention the @field annotation. But since here all other properties like name, gender, age, and salary are exactly similar here, I am not going to change that. This is the first Java class which we need to create. Second thing, we will create the repository. So this is an interface. Repository is an interface just like in the case of JPA. I want this to be inside a package called repository. Repository dot, I'll give the name as employee repository. And this repository extends from something called Mongo repository. Mongo repository is also exactly same as that of your JPA repository. Takes two type parameters here. First one is the document. The document I am using here is employee. And second one is the primary key type. The type of the primary key inside the document. That's it. So your repository is ready now. Now if you go to the Mongo repository here, go to the definition of the Mongo repository here, you can see that it's an interface. Two parameters. First one is the type of the document. Second one is the type of the primary key inside the document. And it is extending from another interface called paging and sorting repository. And if you go to paging and sorting repository, you can see that it extends from current repository. So both Mongo repository and your JPA repository, if you are already familiar with the JPA, extends from CUD repository. So if you go to the CRUD repository here, go to the definition of CRUD repository, all the methods are there. For example, for saving, you have save, you have find by ID, you have access by ID, you can find all by ID, you can delete by ID, delete. All methods which are available in JPA repository are available here also, basically because both the JPA repository and Mongo repository extends from CRUD repository. That is one key point you need to keep in mind. That is why all similarities comes. That's where all similarities comes. Okay, so I'm closing all these definitions. So my repository is ready now. This is all I am mentioning here. Third step is we need to go and create the service layer. So I'll go and create the service interface first. So it's an interface. I want this interface to be present inside a package called service, and the name is employee service. I will include some methods here. First method is a list of employee. Give the name as employees. This is first method. I have to organize the import list. Then we will go for the second method, get employee by ID, which takes an integer parameter here. Third one, I'll go and define the method for adding a new employee, which takes an employee as the parameter. Fourth one is update employee, which takes two parameters. One is integer ID, second one is employee. And third one is, again I'll put it as void, delete employee, which takes an integer ID as the parameter. So these are the methods which I am defining inside the interface here. Now that's done. Now I will go and create the implementation class. That's a class only. So we'll specify the name as employee service IMPL. This is the name, and this is implementing the class, implementing the interface, employee service. Okay, so we will implement the method. All the methods we will implement. Now first thing is we need to have an instance of employee repository that we will define here. Private employee repository, and this has to be injected into my service class by Spring framework. So I am going for auto-wired, and since this is a service class, it has to be annotated with @service. Okay. Now what we need to do is we can make use of this one, employee repository dot find all. That is done. It will actually returns. You can see here it is going to return a list of employee, list of type you can see here. Find employee by ID. I'll use some Java 8 code here. So say employee repository dot find by ID. Based upon this ID I want to find. Dot, if it is not able to be located, if the employee with the specific ID is not present in the database, then you have to throw an exception here. That's why I am chaining this method with another method called or else throw, which takes a supplier, a functional interface supplier as the parameter. New of employee not found exception. I'll give some this thing here. This is not there. Employee with the ID. ID. Again going for not found. That's enough. Okay. Now we need to create this one, employee not found. Go to more action, create a class, and I want this particular class to be present inside the package called exception. So I'll specify exception class here. And this is extending from runtime exception. I'll remove this auto-generated this thing. Instead, I'll go for generate constructor. These two constructors I will generate from the parent class. So that's also ready now. Clear? Now the error has gone here. Okay, so what this statement says is, try to find an employee with this specific ID here, that is find by ID. If you are able to find, then return that employee object. Else, if you are not locate, then throw an exception, employee not found exception with this specific message. Okay, so else or else throw is actually a method which takes a supply, a functional interface which is actually introduced along with the Java 8. Okay. Now adding an employee, I'm not going to check anything. Simply I'll say employee repository. See, employee. So that's also ready now. Update employee. You need to be a little careful here because you need to check each and every property that is coming through the parameter employee here. So first what I will do is I will try to get the employee who is already present inside the database with that specific ID. So here I will use Java 10 feature implicitly typed variable. I will use the term variable name as optional because it is going to return an optional, equal to employee repository dot find by ID. Okay. Now you can see that the type of optional is an optional of employee. Okay. Now first I will check whether you're able to find the employee. Okay. So I'll check if optional dot is empty, which means that there is no element inside the inside the optional, which means that employee is not a employee. We are not able to find the employee. That's actually the meaning. If the optional is empty, which means that the employee is not present. In that case, we need to throw an exception, employee not found exception, with the message employee with the ID plus ID not found. Okay. Else, we need to extract the value out of the optional. I'll say emb optional dot get. This will actually give the employee object, already existing employee object. Now we can start updating after checking whether the properties are present. Employee dot get name not equal to null, which means that if you are providing value for the name property of the employee, then that has to replace the name of the currently existing employee. Okay, so employee dot set name, employee dot get name. This has to be repeated for all the properties. Employee dot get gender not equal to null. In that case, emp dot set gender, employee dot get gender. Okay. If employee dot get get age. So you know age is a numeric value. If you are not providing the value for a numeric value inside a class, by default it is going to be 0. So we have to check for 0 here, not equal to 0, which means that valid data is being provided. In that case, emp dot set age, employee dot get age. Similarly for salary also say, if employee dot get salary not equal to 0, in that case emp dot set salary, employee dot set salary. This set salary, this is actually get salary. It's not set salary. It's okay. After all this change, save the entity by using employee repository dot save emp, not employee emp, because the updated data is present inside the emp only. Okay. Now finally, the delete employee. For delete employee, this part is exactly same. First we are checking for the existence of the current employee. So I'll copy paste that part. Check for the existence. If it is not present, then an exception will be thrown. Otherwise, we will use delete by ID. So my service layer is ready now. All the methods are defined. Sorry. Now the next one which is pending is developing the controller. The controller class only is pending here. So we will go and create a controller class here. I want my controller class to be present inside the package controller. So I'll say controller dot employee controller here. Sorry. So this is a REST controller. So I'll put REST controller here. The first thing, I'll also mention the request mapping here. It is something like this. So this is API/employee is the general request mapping. And finally, we will go and create methods. First one is I need to have an instance of employee service here, that I will declare. And this has to be auto-wired. Now one by one method we will try to implement. First one is getting all the employee. Okay, for that we will go for a method called public list of employee. Give the method name as get all employees. There is no parameter for this method. We will organize the import. Return employee service dot get all employees, get employees. Right. And this is a get request, so I have to annotate with the get mapping. Second method, public, is going to return as specific employee, so the return type is employee. Use get employee by ID. Integer ID here. Say return employee service dot get employee by ID. This is also a get request, so it has to be annotated with the get mapping, but some additional path variable you need to mention. So it is slash ID. ID is the path variable. So you have to mention here that this ID is coming through the path variable by using an annotation called path variable. Okay. Next one is adding a new employee. So public, it's a response entity of any type. Okay, so I'll put question mark, which means that the type parameter can be anything. Add employee. The data for the new resource, new employee resource, is passed through the body of the request. So I have to mention that take the data from the body by using request body annotations, and the data that is coming through is the employee object. Okay. Say employee service here. Add employee. So this will do. And finally, I'll return a response entity. The data, the payload of this response entity is going to be a string. With a message, employee to the ID plus employee dot get ID added successfully. Okay, this is the first parameter. Second parameter is actually the status. So I want the status to be created. So I don't want it to be okay. So I want it to be created. So it's a HTTP status create. So that is this thing. So that is done. And again, this is going to be a post request. So this has to be annotated with the post mapping. So there is no more additional parameter needs to be mentioned here. The URL is API/employees with a post request. Next one is public. Here also I'll use response entity of question mark update employee. Takes two parameters. First parameter is coming to the path variable integer ID. Second parameter is coming through the request body, which is actually employee. Okay. So again I will say employee service dot update employee. ID is the first parameter, employee is the second parameter. Return response entity dot okay I'll put, and the status message I will pass employee to the ID plus ID updated. So that's also done. But this is a put request which has to be mentioned using put mapping. It takes one additional parameter, a path variable, that has to be mentioned here slash ID. Okay, that also done. Now finally the delete employee public. Remove this extra space here. Public. Here also response entity of question mark delete employee. It takes one parameter to the path variable integer ID. Employee service dot delete employee ID. Return response entity dot okay employee with the ID plus ID plus and this is a release delete mapping, delete request, so I have to mention delete mapping here. ID should be passed through the path variable. Okay. So done. So we will execute this program once and see. Okay. We'll check postman here. We'll close all the tabs which are present there. Create a new tab here. The application is running at the port number 8080. So we'll say http ://localhost : 8080/API . So 2 records it needs to pull up. You can see that 2 records are there. The same records which are there. The same document which are there present here. Okay. Now we will try to add one post record. Take this one. Go to the body. Raw data I will specify here. And this is going to be a JSON data. Give the value as 3. Why salary is coming as 0 here? Everywhere salary is coming as 0. There might be some mistake here. Okay, this is capital S we have mentioned. So that's a problem. Now we sent a request for adding this one. So here it is given by the zeros only. So we added it successfully. We'll go and check. You can see that name, annual, gender, male, age 45, salary 0 because salary is given as 0 only here. Okay, so we will update that later. Now you can see that along with the data which we are providing here, that is ID, name, gender, age and salary, an additional property is also getting automatically added here, that is underscore class, which specify the type of the document which you are adding into the collection. Okay, so we will see later how to remove this one. So for the time being, that's fine. Okay, so adding is successful. Now we will try to update this one. I don't want to update anything here, any other things, only the salary needs to be updated. So salary I will mention here as some 98,000. Okay, for the employee 3. This actually I put request. So updated successfully. We'll go and check. Here itself we'll try to get it out. You can see that data is updated. Okay. Now what happens if I try to access an employee which is not there? You will get an exception here, and the exception message is employee with ID 8 not found. So exceptions are getting thrown. So same is the case with trying the update also. Suppose you are trying to update an employee which is not there. There also you will get an exception thrown with the message employee with ID 8 not found. So the exceptions are also correctly getting thrown. So that is also fine here. Now the only thing remaining is try with the delete operations. Okay, so first I'll try to delete an object which is not there. There also you will get the same message employee with ID 18 found. But if I try to delete an object which is present, which is 3 here, employee with ID 3 deleted successfully, and we will try to get all the objects here. You can see only 2 records are there. If you go here, select, you can see that the employee with ID 3 has been removed. Clear? So all the CRUD operations are working perfectly fine here. Now the next thing what we need to address is I need to have some kind of mechanism by which I need to remove this one. I don't want this default property to be added into my document. So what is the solution for that? You can do that. Clear? So for that I'll create a class, a configuration class here. I want this class to be present inside the config package. We'll give the name as Mongo config. And since it's a Mongo configuration class, it has to be annotated with the configuration. I need to declare 2 beans here. First one is of type Mongo database factory. Give the same name here. If you go and check what is Mongo database factory, you can see that it's an interface. Okay. So when you say you need to return return something of type Mongo database factory, what does it mean is you need to return an instance of a type which implements this interface. So which means that we need to go for an implementation of Mongo database factory. So I'll go for that, return of simple Mongo client database factory here. So if you go to the definition here, you can see that there is a constructor here which takes 2 parameters. One is a Mongo client and second one is of type string. So we'll go for this one. You go for this one, if you can see here that it is actually a Mongo client, and second one is the database name. The first one is of type Mongo client and second one is of type database string, which is basically used for providing the database name. Now Mongo client, if you go and look here, it is also an interface, which means that in that specific position here, the Mongo client is an interface. I need to have an instance of a class which implements the interface Mongo client. There is no confusion. Our database name only we need to mention there. Okay, so I'll close these two. Mongo client can be obtained by using a final class called Mongo clients dot create method. If you go to the create method, you can see here Mongo client creates. It actually creates with a new connection string. Automatically create with a new connection string, and the connection string is with the MongoDB : / localhost, which means that it's try to connect to a MongoDB which is present inside the local system. Okay, so that's the first one, first parameter. Second one is the database name. My database name is EMBDB. So that is done. That is the first bean, and since it has to be registered as a bean, I have to annotate it with @bean. Second bean should be of type Mongo template. We'll give the same name. The first thing is we need to have an object of type mapping Mongo converter. I'll give the name as converter equal to new of mapping Mongo converter. So if you go to Mongo mapping constructor, you can see a couple of constructor here. So I'll go here and check for a constructor. Go for a constructor which takes two parameters. Okay, so first one is this one will take clear. Second one is mapping contest. So I'm not able to locate that constructor here. Okay, so let me there only. So we'll go for two constructors. First one will be of type DB ref resolver, and the second is of type mapping contest. So that we will use. So again, if you go here, okay, this one we'll use. This is actually the constructor which we are trying to use, mapping Mongo converter. First parameter is this one, second parameter is a Mongo contest, which we will use. And if you go to the DB ref resolver, it is an interface, okay, which means that you need to have an implementation of that interface. So we'll close this one, we'll come here, we'll use new of default DB ref resolver. This is an implementation of DB ref resolver. The parameter which it takes is of type Mongo database factory. Here you can see that it takes a parameter which is of type Mongo database factory. We already have a Mongo database factory defined here, so we will use that. And the second parameter is of type mapping contest. So I'll say new Mongo mapping contest. So that's fair enough. That's the first thing which you need to do inside the Mongo template. Okay. Second one is converter.set type mapper. Clear? Again, if you look at the set type mapper method here, takes a Mongo type map, a Mongo type mapper. And Mongo type mapper, if you look here, is of type an interface. It's an interface, which means that one of the implementation of Mongo type master you need. Cell close. Go for new of default Mongo type master is an implementation. Here I need to pass null. So type key is null. This is very, very important. If you are not giving the value null, then that underscore class will not be removed from the new records or new documents which you are inserting into the collection. And finally, you can return a template. Return Mongo template. Mongo template. First parameter is of type Mongo factory. You can look here, the constructors. First parameter, I'll go for this one, Mongo database factory, which is already present. Second parameter is a Mongo converter, which is also already present here. So I'll use that one. And second parameter is convert. Okay, so this also has to be registered as a bean. I'll use bean here. Okay. Now compile this one. Start type believe there is no exceptions. Okay. We'll try to get all employees. Okay, all employees are there. We'll try to add one. A post request will go for this is 3. Name same I am keeping. Name is kept as same. Mail. It's a different person. So 21. Okay. Employee with 3 added successfully. If you go and pull out all records, you can see that 3 also has been added successfully. Here also you can check. You can see that underscore class is not getting inserted here. Clear? So how many ever records you add, that underscore class property will not be there. So get request, you have to have a post request here. Added successfully. Try to get all data. So 4 is also getting added. Here also you can see that underscore class property is not getting inserted. Okay. Now there are certain fine tuning which you need to do. For example, suppose I am trying to get an employee which is not there. An exception is being thrown here. So the status report is showing us status code 500 internal server error. Even though the exceptions are getting thrown correctly, the return type, the status code is not actually the correct one. It should have shown 404 not found. So we need to handle the exception in such a way that this kind of things can be handled. So what I'll do is I'll go to create a new Java class and I want this to be inside the exception. So I'll go here and create. I'll put a class called error handler, and this is a controller advice. So I have to annotate with the controller advice, or REST controller advice is also fine. Define a method public response entity of string. I'll put handle employee not found exception. Okay, not found exception. Okay, return view of response entity. The payload is of type string. The first parameter is the payload. That is actually the message that is coming from exception class. Second one is the status, HTTP status not found. And this method is going to handle @ exception handler, and this is going to handle employee not found exception dot class. Okay. Now we will compile this once. Now try to get you can see that employee with ID 9 does not exist. And similarly, if you try to update an employee, also you will get employee with ID 9. One more thing which we need to take care here is, you can see here, the employee with ID 4 already present. If I try to add again, you can see employee with ID 4 added successfully and the status code is 201 created. Clear? But it is not getting added here because it's already present. Here you need to understand the significance of the save method here. If you go to the employee service implementation here, you can see that in the adding also we are using employee repository.save. In the update also we are using employee repository.save here. Okay. So save method got a specific characteristics. So it checks whether the employee you are trying to add, the ID of the employee you are trying to add is already present in the database. If it is already present, then that will be treated as an update operation. If it is not present, then that will be treated as an insert operation. So by default, since you are trying to add an employee which is already there with this particular thing, everything works properly, but it will not add a new record. Instead, it will treat that particular operation as a update operation. But everything, remaining things will work in the method. Whatever code we have written in the add method will get executed. But that internally what the Mongo repository does is, it actually treats that operation as a update operation only. So nothing changes. Clear? So since data is same, nothing changes. It remains exactly the same. So if you want to have some kind of exception to be generated if the record is already there, then you have to make some modification here in the service class. Before adding, you can check if employee repository dot exists by ID, that is employee dot get ID. If this employee with ID already exists, then throw an exception. Okay. Employee already exists, exception. Employee.getID. So this employee not found exception is not there, so we have to create that. Create a class. This should also be present inside the exception package. This is extending from runtime exception. Generate constructor. Two constructors of the parent class I will generate. Okay. Now build that. Now try to add post request, the same ID. You can see that exception is getting thrown with employee with ID 4 already present in the database, but the status report is 500. So that also you need to correct by handling the exception properly. So you have to go to the exception handler. There is exception error handler here. We'll create one more method which is for handling employee already exists exception. This has to be replaced with the employee already exists exception here also. Here, and instead of not found, I have to go for BAT request. Okay. Now again, build this application once. Sent. You can see that 400 BAT request. Similarly, previously we have tried to retrieve an employee which is not there. That case also you can see proper error message with the status code 404 not found. So every aspect has been taken care. Okay. Now what is remaining is, suppose I want, so here I have two employees with the name Manu. I want to retrieve the employee with the name Manu. One is Manu Varma, I believe. Okay. So in that case, we will change. For example, I'll go and change the employee one, okay, with the name. All these things remain same. Only here, change it to Manu. Trying to change only the name here for the employee with the ID 1. The get operation, I have to have a put operation here. Updated successfully. Now if you try to get that employee, it's changed. Okay. Suppose I want to retrieve the employee by name. Okay, so what should we do? That also can be done. The only thing is that you have to go to the repository, define a method, list of employee, find by name, string name. Okay. Organize the import. Okay, that's all. Now in the service layer, we will include one more method here. It's actually a list of employee. Get employees by name, string name. This we will implement in the service implementation. Simply say return employee repository dot find by name. Here, since this name is actually the property of the document here, automatically that method will be generated. You don't have to write the code for retrieving employees by name. That will be automatically generated by the Spring Data MongoDB. Okay. Now in the controller also we will go and implement a method for getting the employee by name. Say public list of employee get employees by name. I'm going to pass it through the request parameter. So I'll say request para string name. Okay. Return employee service dot and here at the rate, it's a get request, so get mapping. I'll put slash by name. Clear? And nothing else. Some additional URL is there along with this thing. Along with it. So the URL for invoking this method is /API/employees/by name. Okay, so even without this also it can work. API you can avoid. Okay, so we'll build this one. Getting on. Clear. So I want to retrieve all employees who is having the name Manu. So get operation slash, we have given something like by name question mark name equal to, I'm passing as a request param here. You can see that employee with ID 1 and employee with ID 3 are selected from here. Here also you can see employee with ID 1 is Manu, employee with ID 3 is Manu. Okay. So that's all I would like to show in this demo. So we have created a RESTful web service which makes use of MongoDB as the backend database. We have taken care of all the aspects, all the exception handling, here, all the configuration part. Clear? Hope you enjoyed this session. Okay. Request all of you to subscribe to my channel. Okay. And if you like the session, please extend your support by liking my video. Thank you. Thank you for attending the session.